Welcome to Ancient Nights. This is a storytelling channel. Every story you will hear here is drawn from the ancient world, told in order, from the very beginning of time, moving forward through the centuries, one story at a time. Most of what we tell comes directly from the Bible. Tonight is one of those nights. Tonight, we tell the first part of the story of Noah and the flood, the story of a warning, and of one man who listened. Last time, we told the story of Cain and Abel, the first brothers, the first offering, the first murder, and we saw how, even in the darkness of that story, the human family did not end. Life went on. The generations multiplied. The world began to fill with people. Tonight, we move forward through those generations. Many years have passed since Cain and Abel. The earth is no longer empty. People have spread across the land, built villages and cities, learned crafts and trades. Humanity has grown and multiplied, just as it was told to. But something has gone wrong. The text tells us, in words that are simple and terrible, what the world had become. It says that the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Read that again, slowly. Every intention, only evil, continually. This is not a description of a world with some bad people in it and some good. It is a description of a world that had turned almost entirely toward darkness, where violence filled the earth, where cruelty had become ordinary, where the crouching thing that God had warned Cain about, the sin waiting at the door, had been let in, not by one man, but by nearly everyone. The door had been thrown open across the whole world, and what came through had spread from heart to heart until it filled the earth. The text uses one word again and again to describe what the world had become: violence. The earth was filled with violence. The strong preyed upon the weak. Cruelty went unpunished. And the corruption was not only in what people did, but in what they were, in the very thoughts of their hearts, which the text says had become only evil all the time. It is a dark picture, perhaps the darkest in all of the early chapters of the Bible. And then the text says something extraordinary, something that we do not often expect to hear about God. It says that the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. Grieved him to his heart. This is not the picture of a distant, cold judge looking down without feeling. This is a picture of grief, of sorrow, of a heart that is broken by what it sees. The God who had walked in the garden in the cool of the evening, who had made the world and called it very good, who had breathed life into the first human being, that God looked at what the world had become and grieved. There is something profound in this. The story of the flood is often thought of as a story of anger, of punishment, and there is judgment in it. But underneath the judgment, the text shows us something else: sorrow, a grief so deep that it reached the very heart of God. He did not look at the corrupted world with cold indifference. He looked at it with the pain of a parent whose children have gone terribly wrong. But in all that darkness, there was one point of light. The text says, "But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." One man. In a world that had turned almost entirely toward evil, there was one man who had not. His name was Noah, and the text tells us who he was in a few careful words. It says that Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. And it says something even more beautiful, that Noah walked with God. Noah walked with God. Those same words were used earlier in the story of only one other person, a man named Enoch, of whom the text says simply that he walked with God, and then was no more. for God took him. To walk with God is one of the highest things the Bible ever says about a human being. It means to live in closeness with God, in step with Him, in friendship with Him. In a world where everyone else had turned away, Noah walked with God. He was not perfect. No human being is, and the story will later show us Noah's own weaknesses. But in his generation, in that dark and violent age, he stood apart. He was righteous. He was faithful. He walked with God when almost no one else did. And because of this, when God decided what He would do about the corrupted world, He came to Noah. Let us pause here for a moment and step gently outside the pages of the Bible to look at the world these ancient words come from. Because the story of a great flood is not found only in the Bible. It is one of the most widespread stories in all of human history. Across the ancient world, in culture after culture, in lands far apart from one another, the same story appears. A great flood that covered the earth, sent as judgment, survived by a righteous few who built a great vessel. The ancient Mesopotamians who lived in the very lands where the Bible's stories are set, told of a flood in their oldest surviving literature. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest written stories known to humankind, carved into clay tablets thousands of years ago, there is a man who is warned of a coming flood, who builds a great boat, who saves his family and the animals, and who sends out birds to find dry land after the waters recede. The parallels are striking, and it is not only Mesopotamia. Flood stories appear in ancient Greece, in India, in China, among the peoples of the Americas and the islands of the Pacific. From nearly every corner of the ancient world, humanity preserved a memory of a great flood, of a catastrophe of water, of a small remnant who survived to begin the world again. Historians and scholars have long wondered about this. Some believe these stories may reflect the memory of real, catastrophic floods in the ancient past, the flooding of great river valleys, or the rising of the seas at the end of the last ice age, when melting ice raised the waters of the world and drowned coastlines where people had once lived. The lands of Mesopotamia, between the great rivers Tigris and Euphrates, were especially prone to devastating floods that could destroy entire cities in a single season. Whatever the source, the flood story is woven deep into the memory of humankind. And of all these many flood stories, it is the story of Noah, preserved in the Bible, that has become the most widely known across the world. Now let us return to Noah, to the one righteous man in a world filled with violence who walked with God. God came to Noah, and He told him what He had decided. He said, "I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth." The corruption had gone too far. The violence had filled the earth, and God had determined to bring it to an end, to wash the world clean, and to begin again. But He would not destroy everything. He would save a remnant. He would save Noah and Noah's family, and enough of every living creature to fill the world again once the waters had passed. There is more worth understanding about the world in which this story is set, and about the extraordinary thing Noah was asked to do. To build a great vessel in the ancient world was among the most demanding tasks a human being could undertake. Long before the age of iron tools and modern shipyards, boats were built by hand, plank by plank, with tools of copper and stone and bronze. The peoples of Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers where these stories are set, were among the earliest boat builders in the world. They built vessels of reed and wood to travel the great rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates, coating them with bitumen, a natural tar that seeped up from the ground in those lands, to make them watertight. This is exactly what the text describes when it tells us that Noah was to cover the ark with pitch, inside and out. The detail is precise, and it reflects the real boat-building practice of the ancient Near East, where bitumen was used to seal vessels against the water for thousands of years. But the ark Noah was asked to build was on a scale beyond anything the ancient world had known. The river craft of Mesopotamia were small, vessels to carry a family or goods to trade up and down the rivers. The ark was to be a floating mountain of wood, longer than a great temple, taller than the walls of a city. To gather the timber alone would have been the work of years. To shape it, to join it, to seal it, all by hand, with ancient tools. It is difficult even to imagine the labor involved. And Noah undertook it not with a great crew of shipwrights, but with his own family, his 3 sons working alongside him season after season, year after year. We do not know how long it took. The text does not tell us precisely, but it must have been many years, a great portion of a lifetime spent building a vessel for a catastrophe that had never come, that no one else believed in, on dry land, far from any sea great enough to float it. And so God gave Noah an instruction, one of the strangest and most demanding instructions ever given to a human being. He said, "Make yourself an ark, a great vessel, a boat unlike anything that had ever been built." The text gives us the details, and they are precise. God told Noah exactly how to build it. "Make it of gopher wood," he said. "Make rooms in it, and cover it inside and out with pitch to make it watertight." And then he gave the measurements: 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. A cubit is an ancient measure, roughly the length of a forearm, from the elbow to the tip of the fingers, about 18 inches, or a little under half a meter. So the ark, in our measurements, was enormous, around 150 meters long, nearly 500 feet, as long as a great ship of the modern age, taller than a 3-story building, a vast wooden vessel, larger than anything the ancient world had ever seen. God told Noah to make it with 3 decks, a lower, a middle, and an upper, to put a door in its side, to make a roof, and an opening for light. Every detail was given. Noah was to build precisely what God had described. And then God told Noah why. He said, "I am going to bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh in which is the breath of life. Everything on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons, and your wife, and your sons' wives with you." Noah's family would be saved. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. 8 people in all. 8 people, out of a whole world. And then God gave Noah the second part of his task. Not only would he save his family, he would save the animals. God said, "Of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, and of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every kind shall come to you, to keep them alive. 2 of every kind, a male and a female of every living creature, brought into the ark, so that after the flood had passed, they could go out again and multiply and refill the earth." The ark was not only a vessel of rescue for one family, it was a vessel of rescue for life itself, a floating refuge in which the living world would be preserved through the destruction and carried safely to the other side. And God told Noah to gather food, every kind of food that is eaten, to store up as provision for Noah and his family and for all the animals, enough to last through the long months of the flood. It was an immense task, to build a vessel larger than any ever made, to gather 2 of every living creature, to store food enough for all of them, to prepare for a catastrophe that had never happened before, that no one had ever seen, in a world that surely mocked him for it. And here the text says something very simple and very powerful. It says, Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. So he did. That is all. No argument. No hesitation recorded. No long list of Noah's doubts or fears. Just, Noah did all that God commanded him. Think about what this meant. Noah was asked to spend years of his life building an enormous boat, far from any sea, in preparation for a flood that no one else believed was coming. We can only imagine what the people around him thought. A man building a vast ship on dry land, warning of waters that would cover the earth. He must have seemed mad to them. He must have been mocked, laughed at, dismissed. Year after year, as the great vessel slowly took shape, Noah must have stood almost entirely alone in his conviction. One man who believed in a world that did not. And yet he did it. He did all that God commanded him. He walked with God, and he trusted God, and he built the ark, plank by plank, year by year, while the world went on in its violence around him. Let us stay for a moment with this image of one man, alone in his conviction, building through the years. Because there is something in Noah's story that speaks to a very human experience. The experience of believing something that no one around you believes, of doing what you know to be right, while the whole world tells you that you are foolish, of holding to a conviction year after year, with no proof yet that you are right, and every voice around you insisting that you are wrong. Noah had no evidence he could show his neighbors. There was no flood yet. There was no rain. The sky was clear, day after day, and still he built. He could not point to the rising waters and say, "Look, it is coming." He had only the word he had been given, and his own faith in the one who had given it. And on the strength of that alone, he gave years of his life to a task that must have looked to everyone around him like madness. This is perhaps why Noah is remembered across so many centuries as a model of faith. Not because he was perfect, not because he never doubted. The text does not tell us his inner thoughts, and he was surely as human as any of us. But because he acted. Because when he was given a task that made no sense to the watching world, he did it anyway. He walked with God, and he trusted, and he built, and he kept building, through all the long years, until the vessel was ready, and the first clouds began to gather. There is a quiet courage in this that has inspired people for thousands of years. The courage to do the right thing when no one understands. The courage to keep faith when there is no proof. The courage to build, plank by plank, toward a future that only you can see. Let us return, for a moment, to the world as it had become before the flood, and try to understand it through the eyes of history. By the time of Noah, if we imagine the world of these ancient stories, humanity had spread and multiplied for many generations. And with that spreading came the rise of the first great concentrations of people, the earliest towns and cities, growing along the rivers and the fertile plains. And history teaches us something sobering about these first cities, that alongside all their achievements, the invention of writing, of law, of trade, of art, came also the first organized warfare, the first great inequalities, the first armies, the first conquests. As human beings gathered in ever greater numbers, they learned not only to build together, but to destroy one another on a scale never before possible. The text says the earth was filled with violence, and whatever else we make of the story, this rings true to what we know of the ancient world. The archaeological record of the earliest civilization shows us walls built for defense, weapons made for war, cities burned and rebuilt and burned again. The gathering of humanity into cities brought the best of what people could create, and too often the worst of what they could do to each other. Violence was not an occasional tragedy in the ancient world. It was woven into the fabric of it. Into this world, a world of rising cities and rising violence, of achievement shadowed by cruelty, came the warning of the flood. Not as the act of a capricious or cruel God, but as the text carefully shows us, as the grief-stricken response of a creator whose world had turned against everything it was made to be. The world that had been called very good had become filled with violence. And God, grieving, determined to wash it clean and begin again. And in the midst of all this, there is one more detail worth pausing on: the covenant. When God spoke to Noah, he used a word that will echo through the entire rest of the Bible. He said, "I will establish my covenant with you." A covenant, a solemn promise, a binding agreement, a sacred bond between God and a human being. This is the first time the word appears in the story of the Bible, and it points forward to everything that will come after. For the story of the Bible in many ways is the story of the covenants between God and humanity, the promises made and kept across the generations. Even here, at the edge of the world's destruction, God was not only bringing judgment, he was making a promise. He was binding himself to Noah, and through Noah to all the life that would be carried through the waters and out the other side. The flood was not only an ending. Held within it, from the very beginning, was a promise of a new beginning, a covenant that would carry the living world through the destruction and into a world made new. That promise is the thread of light running through this dark story. The world had gone wrong. The waters were coming. But God had not given up on his creation. He had chosen one faithful man and one family and two of every living thing, and he had bound himself by covenant to carry them through. Even in the midst of judgment, there was mercy. Even at the edge of the end, there was the promise of a beginning. Before we close this first part, let us sit for a moment with the name of Noah himself, for even his name carries meaning. When Noah was born, generations before the flood, the text tells us that his father named him Noah, saying, "This one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands." The name Noah is connected in the ancient language to the ideas of rest, of comfort, of relief. His father hoped in naming him that this child would somehow bring rest to a weary and broken world. And in a way that his father could never have imagined, that hope came true. For it was through Noah that the world would be given rest from its violence and its corruption. Not the rest his father had in mind, perhaps, but a deeper one. Through Noah, the living world would be carried through the waters and set down again in a world washed clean, given the chance to begin once more. The child named for rest and comfort became the one through whom the world itself would be given a new beginning. There is something fitting in this, that the one righteous man in a violent age should carry a name that means rest, that in the midst of a world filled with the noise of violence and cruelty, there should be one man whose very name spoke of peace, of comfort, of the quiet that comes after the storm. And so, as the ark rose against the sky and the world went on in its violence all around, Noah, the man of rest, kept building, faithful, patient, trusting in a promise that no one else could see, waiting for the day when the skies would darken and the first drops would fall and the long-awaited waters would finally come. This is where we pause tonight, with the ark taking shape, plank by plank, on dry land, with Noah and his family working, day after day, to prepare for something no one had ever seen, with two of every living creature soon to come, and with a world all around them, still filled with violence, still unaware, still going about its days as the great vessel rose slowly against the sky. Next time we will tell the second part of the story. The animals will come, the door will close, and the waters, The waters that Noah had warned of for so long will finally begin to fall. The story of the flood itself, and of what happened when the rain began, and of the long wait for the waters to recede, we will tell it together next time.